The chamber of the Galactic Council was designed to make men feel small. 1,000 banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, glowing in faint colors that represented entire star empires. The seats themselves were carved from luminous stone positioned in tiers like a colosseum, each platform holding the representatives of a species older than Earth's first sparks of civilization. In the center, under the full glare of the council's lamps, stood the lone human delegate. Commander Alden knew the architecture was no accident, every wall curved upward, every angle bent to remind the speaker of their insignificance beneath the great weight of galactic authority. It was the same trick tyrants had used on Earth for centuries: build a hall so vast that the man at its heart feels like an insect. He refused to bow to it. Humans, the council speaker began, voice dripping contempt, request recognition for their military contribution. The pause on military made the gathered audience ripple with muffled laughter. Alden let it wash over him. He had trained his whole life to keep his expression hard, his words precise. He stood straight in the ceremonial uniform of Earth's Defense Corps, a deep blue coat with the silver insignia of the First Fleet stitched across the chest. Not flashy, not imperial, just honest cloth worn by men who had fought and bled. The speaker's mandibles clicked, the sound sharp against the chamber's acoustics. Your species insists it deserves a seat at the council. You arrive with nothing but metal slugs hurled through vacuum, no faster than light weaponry, no teleportation arrays, not even phased plasma. Again the chamber chuckled. Some of the reptilian delegates actually hissed with amusement. Alden's jaw tightened. His people had fought wars that broke continents. They had carried weapons so simple and brutal they seemed primitive compared to the galaxy's delicate devices of energy and light. But in war it was not elegance that mattered. It was survival. He stepped forward. His boots rang on the polished floor, echoing more loudly than he expected. Railguns, he said evenly, were the first weapons our fleets carried beyond Sol. They may not impress you, but they kill. That's what matters. The laughter grew louder, echoing now, swelling in the balconies above. A representative with crystalline skin leaned forward, its form refracting the light. Kill against whom? Against what? You are children, human. We faced the starboard hordes before your species shed its fur. We tamed singularities when you still sharpened stones. And you dare, we dare. Alden cut in, voice hard as steel. Because every empire in this chamber has forgotten what fear feels like. You weigh war with teleportation arrays that move fleets across systems in a blink, with plasma arcs that disintegrate your enemies before they draw a breath. But all of you have grown soft. You play at war with toys you don't respect. The chamber fell into a low murmur. Some were insulted, some perhaps curious. The speaker leaned forward, thin mouth curling into what passed as a smile. You expect us to believe your crude rail guns can compete with the precision of teleporters? Alden's gaze swept the room. I don't expect you to believe anything. Belief isn't required. Reality doesn't care if you laugh. It doesn't care if you mock. It only cares who survives the battle. For a moment silence, then a booming laugh from one of the warlords seated high on the balcony. Perhaps we should let the humans prove it. The warlord roared, pounding a scaled fist against the railing. Give them an enemy worthy of their slugs. Let us see how long their metal holds. against teleporting fleets. The chamber erupted again, some cheering. Mockingly, others whispering. The speaker raised his hand for silence. "Very well," he said coldly. "Demonstration then. A border skirmish is already brewing in the Aura sector. The Dran marauders harass shipping lanes. Unchecked, if humanity wishes to prove itself, it may send its fleets. Show us your rail guns, and when your ships are ash and your crews scattered into the void, we shall remind you what true war looks like." The gavel struck the floor and the banners above pulsed once in approval. Commander Alden bowed his head, not in submission but in calculation. The council had just offered him the one thing humanity needed most, a chance. He turned and walked from the chamber, the sound of alien laughter chasing him. He did not let it pierce him. He carried the faces of men who would stand with him, who had spent their lives preparing for this very trial. Railguns first, teleporters later. And when the moment came, the galaxy would choke on its own pride. The return to orbit was always the strangest part. Commander Alden stepped from the shuttle into the airlock of the Resolute, and the hiss of Earth's atmosphere being recycled around him was like breathing after nearly drowning. The council chamber had been vast and suffocating, every eye cutting him down like he was an insect brought to a moose king's. But here the air smelled of machine oil, ozone, and recycled sweat. Here he belonged. "Commander on deck," a voice barked the moment the hatch slid open. Every crewman within earshot snapped upright, heels clanging against steel plating, fists tight against their sides. Not out of tradition. Earth's Navy didn't have centuries of polished pomp like the council fleets, but out of respect. These were men who had bled together, who had welded their ships in shipyards where sparks lit the night sky, who had buried comrades in the cold silence of orbit. Alden gave a curt nod, stripping the gloves from his hands. At ease, the crew relaxed, though not by much. There was tension in the air, thick coiled electric. They had heard word moved faster than any official announcement. The council had mocked them, the council had dared them, and now the Resolute and her sister ships would march into battle as a spectacle meant to prove humanity's backwardness to the entire galaxy. He strode down the corridor, boots pounding the narrow deck. The Resolute wasn't elegant like the sleek, blade-thin ships of the council races. She was bulky, armor-plated, every surface layer with shielded plating that bore welding scars. Pipes and conduits ran along the walls, visible, humming with power. The ship wasn't a cathedral. She was a factory built to work, not to inspire awe, and Alden preferred her that way. In the command bridge, his officers waited. Lieutenant Harrow, sharp-eyed and raw, was first to speak. "Sir, the men are restless. They've seen the broadcast. Some think this is suicide." "Some?" Alden asked, dropping into the captain's chair, the old leather creaking. Harrow hesitated. "Most, sir." The bridge was silent, the only sound the low thrum of the reactors. The navigation officer, Riggs, cleared his throat. "The council fleet, sir. They jump across sectors with teleportation arrays. We'll be crawling by comparison. Everyone knows it." Alden folded his hands. He had expected this. Hell, he felt the same, knowing fear himself, but fear had never stopped humanity from pulling the trigger. "They've made us a test. Gentlemen, a joke. They expect us to bleed and die to remind them how small we are." so we'll remind them of something else. Instead, what's that, sir? That wars aren't won by pride, they're won by whoever buries their enemy first. The words hung heavy. Alden leaned forward, eyes sweeping across the bridge. Crew, I won't lie to you, they're faster, they're sleeker, their weapons dissolve ships before we can blink, but all that elegance depends on delicate systems, teleporters that must stay aligned to the Nankond energy grids, balanced so finely they collapse if struck in the wrong place. They've forgotten that war isn't a ballet, it's a slaughterhouse, and that's where we excel. Harrow shifted uneasy. Sir, railguns against teleporters, how can a slug of metal stop a ship that moves between coordinates faster than we can target? Alden allowed himself the faintest smile. Because teleporters don't fire when they're mid-jump, they can't. It collapses the entire array for one heartbeat before and after the jump. They're vulnerable, that's all we need. The officers exchanged glances. Riggs muttered, 1 heartbeat's not much, it's enough. Alden said, we'll time our shots, we'll throw slugs faster than they can dodge. And when the first alien ship shatters under a primitive rail gun, the council will choke on their arrogance. Silence again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was resolve, sharp as a blade. The following days bled together in long hours of drills. The Resolute joined the Ironclad, the Tempest, and the Vigilant, 4 ships that carried Earth's pride. Across the stars, they weren't many compared to the fleets of other empires. They were ants beneath leviathans. But each ship bristled with coil-mounted cannons, their barrels the length of city blocks, their capacitors hungry and humming with energy, the crew trained like men possessed, targeting officers drilled until their eyes blurred. Gunnery crews ran through reloads until their muscles burned. Every man aboard knew the truth. They were stepping into the Horus sector as bait, the galaxy watching for their humiliation. No one wanted to be the weak link. Alden walked the decks daily, speaking to the men, not speeches. He hated speeches. Just quiet words, a hand on a shoulder, a reminder that fear meant you were still alive. And every time he looked into their faces, grimy, tired, but determined, he knew Earth had chosen the right men for this moment. The jump into Horus was slower than the council ships would have managed. Human FTL drives bent space through brute force, not elegant folds. It took hours, not seconds, to claw their way into the sector. The trip rattled, teeth shook, bolts from their housings, and left every stomach unsettled. But they arrived, and when the view cleared, the void was already alive with fire. Drillin' marauders swarmed the trade lanes, ships shaped like hooked talons, jagged and vicious, tearing into defenseless freighters. Plasma bolts arced across the black, carving metal apart like paper. Escape pods drifted, some already burning. The Draylen were not conquerors, they were hyenas feasting on weakness. Targets acquired, Harrow reported, voice sharp. Diarial and fleet numbers, at least 40. Vessels mixed class, they're spread thin across the lanes, they don't see us yet. Alden studied the tactical display. 40 against 4, to the council it would look like suicide. To the men aboard his ships, it was simply Tuesday. Bring us into range, Alden ordered. The Resolute surged forward, engines rumbling like caged beasts. The other 3 ships fell into formation, armor glinting faintly against the starlight. Targeting locked, Riggs called out. Alden's gaze narrowed. Fire, the Resolute bucked as her primary rail gun discharged a tungsten slug the size of a city bus screamed across the void at hypersonic velocity, invisible until it tore through the first Marauder ship. The alien vessel split like paper, its reactor blooming into a fireball that blinded sensors for a heartbeat. The bridge crew erupted with shouts. Direct hit. They're scrambling, sir. Reloading. Railguns 2 and 3 online. The second volley came a heartbeat. Later, slugs ripping through void. Shields tearing alien hulls into molten shrapnel, where plasma bolts dissolved. Matter railguns annihilated it with sheer force. There was no elegance, only carnage. Enemy reinforcements vectoring toward us, Harrow reported, his voice shook. Not with fear, but with adrenaline. They've noticed us now. Good, Alden said coldly. Let them notice. The Marauders regrouped, teleporters flaring as they blinked. Across the sector, in an instant, half a dozen ships appeared on the Resolutes. Flanks, plasma arcs blazing, the shields screamed under impact, panels flickered, warning lights flashing red. They're trying to flank us, Riggs shouted. Steady, Alden barked, his knuckles widened around the chairs. Armrest, hold your fire, wait for the jump. On the tactical display, the Marauder ships began their next teleport sequence, energy spikes rising, coordinates aligning, and for one heartbeat they were naked. Now the Resolute's cannons roared, slugs ripped into the void where the Marauders reappeared, smashing through their midsections before their shields could even reinitialize. Half a dozen ships erupted into debris, their teleport arrays torn apart. Mid-cycle, the bridge shook with the shockwave, but Alden only smiled grimly. That's how you kill gods, with iron. The battle raged for hours, 4 human ships against 40 Marauders. The ironclad lost half her shielding, her hull peppered with molten scars. The Vigilant vented atmosphere from 3 decks after a plasma strike gutted her midsection, but they held. Every time a Marauder blinked across the field, rail guns were already waiting. The Council had mocked humanity's slowness, their crude weapons, but slow ships meant stable firing platforms, crude weapons meant unstoppable force. Rail guns didn't care about elegance, they didn't care about pride, they cared only about physics. And physics didn't lose arguments. By the time the last Marauder detonated, the trade lanes were littered with wreckage, 40 alien ships reduced to drifting slag. On the bridge of the Resolute, silence reigned. The crew stared at the view screens in disbelief. Then slowly the silence broke into cheers, raw, ragged, full of disbelief and triumph. Alden didn't join them, he only watched the wreckage and thought of the Council chamber, the sneers, the laughter. He thought of the gavel striking the floor like a sentence. Let them laugh now. This was only the beginning. The battlefield was silent now, drifting. Wreckage turned slowly in the black. Fragments of metal glowing where plasma fires still licked at ruptured hulls. Broken ships spun endlessly, venting atmosphere in faint plumes that shimmered against starlight. The Resolute held position at the center, her armor scarred, her shields burnt down to a flicker, but still alive, still defiant. Commander Alden stood at the forward viewport, arms folded behind his back, watching the debris field. 40 Marauder ships had come to feed on defenseless Freyers. 40 had died. 4 human ships remained. Casualty reports incoming, Lieutenant Harrow said, voice low. Vigilant lost 73. Crew. Hull breach on 3 decks. Ironclad lost 61. Reactor compartment nearly flooded. Tempest lost 43, but she's holding steady. Alden didn't flinch. Every number was a knife. Every number was a name, a face. A story that would never see Earth. Again, he felt the weight of them pressing on his shoulders, but he didn't let it show. Commanders didn't have that luxury. Rescue operations, Alden asked. Already underway, Harrow said. We've picked up 12 escape pods from the freighters so far. Survivors are shaken but alive. More pods on long-range scanners. Drifting beyond debris fields. Alden nodded once. Bring them aboard, every last one. The bridge officers exchanged looks. It wasn't procedure. Survivors were usually turned over to neutral rescue crews or council relief ships. But Alden wanted them here on human decks. He wanted them to see with their own eyes who had saved them. By the time the first survivors were hauled aboard, the Resolute's corridors were lined with crew. Men gave up their bunks there, rations, even their uniforms to clothe and feed the half-starved freighter passengers. Alden walked among them, silent, watching the reactions. The survivors were a mix of species. Thin, trembling insectoids clutching their children, reptilian traders whose scaled hides were blackened by fire, soft-skinned humanoids with burns across their faces. All of them stared at the humans with something he hadn't seen, directed at his kind in the council chambers. Not scorn, not mockery, but, you destroyed them. One survivor whispered, his voice raw. A reptilian merchant clutched Alden's sleeve, eyes wide. They teleported, they swarmed, and you killed them all. I saw it. I saw your weapons tear them apart. Alden didn't answer. He only clasped the man's forearm firmly, grounding him. He didn't need to speak. The wreckage outside spoke louder than words. The victory spread faster than Alden could have imagined. Council monitoring stations had recorded the entire engagement, transmitting live feeds to the central archives. What had begun as amusement, 4 human ships sent to test themselves against marauders had turned into a spectacle the galaxy couldn't stop watching. In less than a day, every major world was buzzing with reports. Footage of Dran ships blinking into existence only to be torn apart by rail. Gun slugs ran on endless loops. Commentators dissected the battle frame by frame, trying to explain how a species without teleportation arrays had outmaneuvered marauders who relied on them. Some races refused to believe it. They claimed trickery, falsified recordings, hidden council interference. Others whispered in dark corners, their certainty shaken. If railguns could do this to marauders, what else could they do? The council chamber was in uproar. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices rising in a cacophony of hisses, growls, and guttural tones. The banners above pulsed angrily as the speaker slammed his gavel again and again. Order, you come to order. The crystal-skinned representative was nearly glowing with fury. This is unacceptable. Humanity was meant to be tested, not to humiliate us before the galaxy. They embarrassed no one but the marauders. Scaled warlord retorted, fangs bared in a grin, and frankly, the Dran deserved it. About time someone put them down properly. They embarrassed all of us. The crystal delegate snapped. 40 ships destroyed by 4 primitive vessels. Already broadcasts on 100 worlds are asking if humanity has found a counter to teleportation warfare. Our citizens demand answers. The speaker's mandibles clicked sharply, and we will give them answers. Humanity's victory is a fluke. Nothing more. A lucky strike against a disorganized pack of raiders. Hardly proof of military merit. Murmurs spread. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain, but not all voices were calm. They cannot be ignored now, rumbled a delegate with bronze-scaled skin, his deep-set eyes glaring across the chamber. You laughed when they spoke of railguns. Now you see what those weapons do when fired by men who are not afraid to die. They may lack teleporters, but they have something more dangerous: stubbornness. That stubbornness will cost them dearly, the speaker hissed. For their arrogance in defying us, we shall give them a true test, not marauders, not scavengers, a council fleet. Let us see their slugs shatter when faced with disciplined soldiers, not rabble. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. Slowly, banners pulsed one by one in agreement. So it was decided. Alden read the council transmission. Silence, the text scrolling across his console. The Resolute was docked for emergency repairs. The crew stretched thin, patching holes in her armor. Men slept where they worked, helmets still on, grease staining their uniforms. Yet morale was high. Too high. The men were drunk on victory. He couldn't let them think this war was won. Lieutenant Alden said quietly. Harrow approached, a data pad under his arm, fatigue shadowing his eyes. Sir, the council's sending a fleet. The words hit Harrow like a punch. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. They want to prove we were lucky, Alden continued, voice flat, that our win against the Dran was chance. They're sending trained soldiers, warships designed for frontline combat, not raiding. Harrow swallowed hard. How many more than 4? Alden said dryly. He closed the transmission with a flick of his hand. They'll come fast with teleportation, faster than we can react, which means we need to make every shot count. Harrow shifted uneasily. And if we don't? Alden finally looked at him. His eyes were cold steel. Then we die, and the council gets its laughter back. That night Alden walked the observation deck alone. Through the viewport he could see the distant stars of Oris, their faint glow hidden behind clouds of drifting wreckage. Somewhere out there, new enemies were already preparing to hunt him. He thought of Earth, of the shipyards along the Atlantic coast, sparks flying as welders bent steel into the shape of dreams, of the families who had sent sons and brothers into the void, knowing most would never come home. He thought of the council's sneering faces, the speaker's mandibles clacking with contempt, the laughter that had followed him out of the chamber. And he swore silently that when the council's fleet came, they would not find Earth weak. They would not find men begging for mercy. They would find steel and grit and slugs that did not stop until every ounce of pride in that chamber lay broken in orbit. The days that followed were preparation. The Resolute, ironclad, Tempest, and Vigilant worked in unison, their crews becoming something sharper than soldiers, executioners. They drilled firing solutions against teleporting targets until their eyes bled. They calibrated railgun timing sequences to fractions of a second. They tested, retested, and tested again. Men fell asleep at their posts, woke to alarms, stumbled back into the rhythm. Without complaint, fear was gone now. Only resolve remained. Alden drilled alongside them. He didn't hide in his quarters or issue orders. From comfort, he strapped into simulators, manned targeting controls, even lifted plasma cutters to help patch the hull when needed. The men saw him, their shoulder to shoulder, and it bound them to him in ways no speech ever could. Every man aboard knew the truth. The council wasn't sending marauders. This time they were sending professionals, ships faster, cleaner, sharper. But that didn't matter. They also knew the truth Alden had given them. Wars weren't ballets, they were slaughterhouses, and slaughter was something humanity understood well. When the warning finally came, it was almost anticlimactic. Long-range sensors detecting council fleet signatures, rigs reported on the bridge, 10 vessels inbound. Teleportation spooling, estimated arrival in 3 minutes. The bridge fell silent. Every officer looked to Alden. He rose from the captain's chair slowly, his uniform dark with oil stains, his eyes ringed with exhaustion but burning bright. He glanced at each of them in turn, steady, unflinching. "They think this will break us," Alden said quietly. "That will fold when faced with their pride, but pride doesn't win wars, guns do. So when those ships arrive, you remember who you are. You're not savages, you're not children, you're soldiers, and you're about to teach the council what it means to fight men who do not break." The countdown ticked on the screen. 3 minutes, 2-1. The void lit up as 10 council warships tore through space in perfect formation. Teleportation arrays burning like suns. Sleek silver hulls bristled with energy. Weapons, shields glowing faintly with layered protection. They were beautiful in their symmetry. The Resolute's rail guns hummed, capacitors charged, barrels glowing faintly, targets locked, rigs whispered. Alden's voice was calm. "Then let's break their pride." The void split open like a wound. 10 council warships blinked into existence with the grace of predators, their silver hulls gleaming under Oris's faint starlight. Perfect symmetry, angled like blades, shields shimmering, plasma arrays already warming. These were not marauders, these were soldiers, forged in the heart of the councils. Fleets drilled to precision. On the bridge of the Resolute, the atmosphere thickened like a storm, rolling over trenches. The crew stared in silence at the tactical display. 10 against 4, not scavengers, not rabble, a force designed to erase doubt in one clean strike. "Signal from the lead ship," Harrow said. Voice tight. "Put it through," Alden replied. The view screen flared to life. A tall alien figure appeared, clad in gleaming armor, his crystalline skin catching light in sharp reflections. His voice carried the polished arrogance of centuries. "Commander Alden of Earth," he began, every syllable precise, "you have embarrassed the council with your crude victory. You have misled lesser minds into believing your weapons hold merit. This ends today. Surrender your ships and submit to judgment. You will be spared humiliation if you admit your species' place." The crew bristled. Alden leaned forward, expression carved in stone. "Humiliation," he said quietly, "is sending 10 ships to silence 4 and still fearing what they'll do." The crystalline commander tilted his head. "So be it. When the council sees your wreckage, they will forget your insolence." The transmission cut on the bridge. Riggs muttered, "Arrogant bastard. They're counting on us to break," Alden said, standing tall. "Let's make sure it's their pride that does The Council ships moved first, teleportation arrays flared, their sleek forms vanishing from sensors in blinding bursts. In the same breath, alarm screamed aboard the Resolute, energy spikes detected. Brace, Alden roared. The Resolute shuddered violently as two Council ships reappeared in flanking positions, plasma arcs already firing, blue-white fire slammed into shields, cracking them like glass under strain. Panels exploded, sparks showering the bridge, men shielding their faces, shields down to 60%, Harrow shouted. Alden's voice was cold steel. Hold your fire, wait for their arrays. The crew locked onto the tactical readouts. The two Council ships began recalibrating for their next teleport, shields flaring brighter as systems shifted. For one heartbeat there, weapons paused. Now the Resolute's rail guns thundered. 3 slugs ripped forward, invisible to the naked eye. Faster than thought, they tore through the first ship's side plating, smashing straight into its reactor. The detonation bloomed like a miniature star, shards of hull spinning outward. The second ship blinked mid-teleport, one slug grazing its array. As it vanished, it reappeared kilometers away, crippled, its shields flickering, its hull venting molten trails. The bridge erupted in shouts. One down, Riggs yelled, second damaged. But there was no time to celebrate. 8 more Council warships descended like wolves, teleporting in staggered formations, plasma fire screaming through the void. The ironclad took the brunt, her armor glowing white as her shields collapsed, entire sections of plating ripping free. She's venting atmosphere, Harrow cried on the comm. Captain Dorn of the ironclad's voice cut through static. We're still alive. Commander, just point us at the bastards. Alden's jaw clenched. All ships concentrate fire, target teleport arrays, and NBSP them before they dance out of reach. The battle became chaos. Railgun slugs cut through space, carving glowing scars into Council hulls. For every precise shot, another volley of plasma lashed back, tearing into human ships with surgical brutality. The Vigilant staggered under repeated strikes, her engines flaring erratically. On the view screen, Alden saw her break formation, smoke pouring from ruptures along her midsection. She fought like a dying beast, cannons roaring until one plasma bolt speared her clean through. The explosion swallowed her in silence. Men on the Resolute flinched, some shouting, some going deathly quiet. The Vigilant had carried 200 souls, gone in an instant. Alden's voice cut through the shock like a blade. Focus. Every second we grieve is a second they kill another ship. Make their deaths count. The Resolute and Tempest turned their rail guns on the nearest Council frigate. Slugs hammered its shields relentlessly until the generators collapsed. The final shot smashed through its bridge in a flash of molten shards, sending the ship spiraling dead into the void. But victory came at a price. The Tempest screamed under fire, her port side engulfed in plasma. Emergency lights blazed as she staggered away, hull cracking apart. Her captain's last message reached the Resolute through static. Will ram them, finish the job. On the tactical display, the Tempest's engines roared as she accelerated straight toward a Council destroyer. Plasma fire tore into her, ripping her apart piece by piece, but still she drove forward. The impact lit the void in an explosion so bright the bridge crew shielded their eyes. 2 ships gone, 3 council vessels destroyed. The balance was narrowing, but the cost was blood. Alarms blared again. 4 ships circling, Riggs shouted. "There, trying to box us in," the Resolute groaned as Alden swung her hard to port. Rail guns reloading under strain. Plasma fire rad her hull, melting armor, vaporizing entire corridors. Men screamed over the comm as compartments vented into space. "There, hurting us, Commander," Harrow shouted. Alden's eyes locked on the tactical readout. The council ships were trying to force him into predictable patterns. Closing the trap, he thought of the council chamber, the sneers, the laughter. They expected him to panic. "Then let's remind them," he growled, "that men fight like cornered wolves. Helm full stop. Guns prepare to fire on my mark." The Resolute lurched to a halt, inertia slamming the crew against their harnesses. The council ships overshot, caught off guard. In that instant, as their teleporter rays began to spool, again fire, Railgun screamed. 6 slugs tore into the nearest 2 ships, punching through their cores before they could blink away. Both erupted in twin blossoms of fire, debris showering into the void. The bridge roared, but the price came immediately. A third council ship's plasma volley smashed into the Resolute starboard side, tearing open entire decks. Fire ripped through corridors, men burning before they could scream. Damage control teams dispatched, Harrow shouted over the chaos. Hull integrity collapsing on sections 3 through 5. Alden gritted his teeth. "Seal the bulkheads no matter who's inside." Harrow froze, but he obeyed the order. Killed dozens of men, locking them behind fireproof doors as their compartments vented into space. It saved the ship, but it stained Alden's soul. The battle dragged on like a nightmare. The ironclad fought like a dying titan, her hull already gutted, rail guns firing until the very last capacitor failed. She took 2 more council ships with her captain screaming defiance over comms until his voice cut to static. The Resolute bled from a dozen wounds. Her plating melted, her decks filled with smoke and fire, but her rail guns still roared. By the time the void went quiet again, wreckage floated in every direction. 7 council ships destroyed, 2 crippled beyond use, drifting helplessly. 1, their flagship, still intact, limping away, shields flickering like a dying flame. The Resolute turned, guns locked on its retreating form. "Commander," Riggs said, his voice, "she's running." Alden stood tall, eyes hard. "Then let her run, let her crawl back to the council and tell them what 4 ships did. Tell them what rail guns did. Tell them pride bleeds." Silence fell. The surviving crew stared at him, battered and broken, but alive. They had stared into the jaws of the council's finest and still breathed. Galaxy would never laugh the same way again, but Alden knew this wasn't the end. The council wouldn't stop. They couldn't. Their pride wouldn't allow it. This was only the beginning, and humanity had just declared war. The battlefield still smoldered days after the fighting ended. Wreckage spun in endless silence. The corpses of mighty ships orbiting invisible graves. The Resolute limped through the debris field, her hull charred, her plating gouged by fire. She had survived, but barely. Inside, the ship felt like a tomb. Corridors were blackened, bulkheads twisted. Men moved like ghosts, faces hollow with exhaustion. There were no cheers, no Celebrations now, only the heavy weight of survival. Alden walked those halls every step. Echoing the cost, he passed sealed doors, knowing what lay behind them. Sections he had ordered cut off, filled with the bodies of men who had burned or suffocated so that the rest could live. He felt their eyes on him, even in death. At the memorial wall in the central deck, names had already been carved into steel plates. Hundreds. Men from the Vigilant, the Tempest, the Ironclad, and dozens from his own ship. Crewmen stood in silence before the wall, heads bowed, some whispering prayers, others only staring as though waiting for the names to fade away. Alden stood with them, silent. He had no prayers left. The message arrived not long after. The flagship of the Council fleet, the one ship that had limped away, had returned home. It carried with it the story of humiliation. 10 ships had gone to erase humanity's insolence. 9 had been lost. The news ignited the galaxy. Broadcasts spread like wildfire, showing Council vessels erupting under primitive slugs of iron. Commentators screamed on every channel, some outraged, some exhilarated. On border worlds, men whispered that perhaps the Council wasn't invincible. On others, riots broke out, citizens demanding to know why their sons died against humans who weren't supposed to matter. And in the Council chamber, chaos reigned. The speaker slammed his gavel until cracks split the days. Silence, he roared, his mandibles clicking furiously, but there was no silence. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices a storm of fury and fear. They destroyed 9 of our warships. One voice thundered, with weapons older than our records. Another spat, they humiliated us before the galaxy. They've proven themselves dangerous. They've proven themselves worthy. The chamber split down the middle, some voices demanding Earth's annihilation, others calling for restraint. The crystalline commander, whose fleet had been shattered, stood in the center, his body cracked and dimmed from battle scars. His voice shook with fury. They cheated, trickery, cowardice. They waited for teleportation windows, exploited them with timing no savage species should possess. They are vermin, nothing more. You call it trickery, the bronze-cowled warlord rumbled, leaning forward, but I call it discipline, precision. They killed you because they fought like men who know death is certain and fight. Anyway, tell me, when was the last time your crews bled like that? Murmurs swept the chamber. The speaker struck his gavel again, voice rising above the din. Enough, humanity will be punished. Their insolence cannot stand. Already the galaxy questions our supremacy. If they believe these rail guns are a match for us, instability will spread like fire. We must stamp it out at once. And what if we fail again? The bronze warlord asked coldly. The chamber froze. The speaker's mandibles clacked sharply. We will not fail. This time we do not send token fleets. We bring the full weight of the Council's armada. We burn their worlds, erase their shipyards, crush their defiance before it grows. Further, humanity will be a warning to any who dare forget who rules this galaxy. Banners pulsed one by one in agreement. The warlord leaned back silent, his eyes, however, burned with something else, not fear, not anger, something Alden would later recognize as respect. On the Resolute, repairs continued. Around the clock, the shipyard at Oris was primitive compared to the Council's glittering facilities, but men worked with bare hands and fire, welding new Plating, patching reactors with whatever scrap they could salvage. They weren't engineers, they were survivors. And that made them better. In the mess hall the crew gathered, not for food, rations were short, but for words. Men needed to know what came next. They needed to hear from the one man who hadn't broken. Alden stood before them, his uniform torn, his face lined with exhaustion. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence linger heavy as the names carved into the memorial wall. Finally his voice cut through the air, steady. We fought the council and we survived. The men straightened, eyes that had been hollow now sharpened. They sent 10 ships to break us. We sent 9 back as fire and wreckage. They thought our weapons were crude. Now they know better, but they will come again. And next time they will not send 10. He looked across the faces, scarred, tired. Young, old men who had seen death and spat in its face. When they come, they will bring everything their full weight. They will try to burn Earth from the stars to erase us so no one remembers we stood against them. That is the truth. The silence deepened. And yet Alden said, his voice rising, I would rather die standing with iron in my hands than live bowing to their pride. You've proven that we can make them bleed. Now we'll prove we can make them fall. If the council wants war, then by God we'll give them war. The hall erupted, not with cheers, but with the grim roar of men ready for slaughter. It wasn't joy, it wasn't hope, it was defiance, raw and burning. Later, alone in his quarters, Alden allowed himself a moment of weakness. He sat at his desk, staring at the data pad that held casualty reports. Too many names, men he had spoken to, men he had promised to bring home. He poured a glass of water, staring into its surface. His reflection stared back, hollowed, streaked with grime. He thought of Earth, of oceans and skies untouched by war. He thought of families who would never see their sons again. And he thought of the council, their laughter, their arrogance. He swore again quietly that he would break them. Back in the council chamber, plans were already in motion. The speaker stood with his inner circle, maps of human space projected in glowing arcs. Red markers showed Earth, her colonies, her shipyards. We strike swiftly, the speaker said, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Their fleets are few, their technology limited. If we destroy their centers of production, they will collapse within months. The crystalline commander bowed low, eager for revenge. I will lead the strike. No, the speaker snapped, you have failed. Once, humanity requires more than vengeance, they require annihilation. We will send the Armageddon fleet. Every world they touch will burn. The delegates murmured in approval. The Armageddon fleet was the council's hammer, a force so vast that no species had ever stood against it and lived. Humanity wanted recognition. The speaker hissed, we shall carve it into their bones. But not all agreed. In private, the bronze-scaled warlord met with his advisors. He watched footage of the human battle again and again, the timing of their railgun volleys, the discipline of their formations, the way they turned desperation into precision. They should not have survived, he murmured. Then why did they? One advisor asked. The warlord's eyes narrowed. Because they fight like we once did. Before centuries of peace dulled our claws, before teleporters made war game, they remember what we have forgotten. He sat back, scales catching the dim light. If the council thinks it can crush them, Easily it is blind, humanity is. Dangerous, and if they are destroyed, something vital dies with them. He said no more, but deep inside, respect hardened into something else. Something that in time would chain everything. On the Resolute, Alden received the latest intelligence. The Council was preparing their armada. He knew what that meant, war on a scale Earth had never faced. He stood at the viewport, watching the stars behind him. The ship groaned under repairs, the men grinding through exhaustion to ready her for the next fight. He didn't know if they could win. He didn't know if Earth would survive. But he knew one thing: when the Council came with their pride, humanity would meet them with iron. And iron never forgave arrogance. The Council called it the Armageddon Fleet. It was more than a military formation. It was a declaration. Ships from a dozen empires were gathered into one armada, each bristling with the finest weapons the galaxy had ever produced. Massive carriers with teleportation cores glowing like suns, sleek destroyers that moved with predatory grace, battleships plated alloys stronger than steel, armed with plasma cannons that could split moons. The fleet hung in orbit above a Council stronghold world, a living wall of metal and pride. From a distance it looked like a constellation had gathered itself into a single burning cluster. 10,000 ships, everyone a jewel of the Council's supremacy. The speaker addressed them from the command thus, his voice transmitted across the entire formation. Humanity has mocked us, he said, mandibles clicking. They have humiliated our fleets. They believe crude iron can challenge our dominion. Today we remind the galaxy who rules the stars. Today we erase the mistake of their defiance. Humanity will not endure. Cheers erupted across comms. Officers and soldiers shouted their approval, their arrogance unshaken. To them this wasn't war, it was extermination. The Armageddon fleet turned its engines toward Earth. On the Resolute, Commander Alden studied the reports with grim focus. 10,000 ships, 10,000 against what humanity could scrape together, fewer than 100 war-capable vessels, most still under construction, half lacking proper shields. Earth's colonies were spread thin, barely fortified. Some had no defenses at all beyond civilian freighters fitted with makeshift guns. It wasn't a war, it was slaughter waiting to happen. But Alden had no intention of making it easy. He stood at the hollow table in the war room, senior officers arrayed around him. Harrow, gaunt but sharp-eyed, rigs his hands, trembling from exhaustion but still steady on the controls. New captains from hastily assembled ships, faces pale with the weight of what was coming. This is the situation, Alden said. The hollow table projected the enemy's movement, a wave of red sweeping towards Sol. The Council brings numbers we can't match. Their weapons outgun ours. Their shields outlast ours. If we meet them in open battle, we die. Silence filled the room. Everyone knew it. So we don't fight their war, Alden continued. We fight ours. He tapped the controls and new projections lit the table. Railgun platforms, massive constructs anchored to asteroids, hidden in belts buried on moons. Tens of thousands of tons of steel barrels, coils wound by the hands of desperate engineers, powered by reactors cannibalized from mining stations. This is our strength, Alden said. They mocked our weapons, called them primitive, but railguns don't need elegance. They don't need teleportation. They only need timing, and timing is something we own. Harrow leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You want to turn the system itself into a kill zone? Alden nodded once. Every asteroid a cannon, every moon a fortress, every orbital path a trap. If they want Earth, they'll have to wade through iron. The officers exchanged uneasy looks. It was audacious. Impossible almost, but impossible was all they had left. Earth's shipyards became hives of desperation, factories that once built shuttles were torn apart, retold to churn out rail slugs the size of trains. Civilian freighters were gutted, retrofitted with crude cannons bolted to their hulls, mining colonies stripped their own infrastructure to provide metal for barrels and coils. Even children carried steel in wheelbarrows, feeding furnaces that burned day and night. Everywhere Alden went, he saw it. The quiet madness of survival, men working until their hands bled, women welding, plating onto ships under floodlights, old men digging bunkers with trembling arms. There were no civilians anymore. There were only soldiers, whether they carried rifles or rivet guns. Propaganda networks broadcast images of the Horus victory on endless repeat, the sight of marauder ships torn apart by railgun fire became a symbol. They weren't called primitive anymore. They were called righteous. Earth's people whispered a new word in the streets: defiance. But not everyone believed. In the underground chambers of Earth's political council, arguments erupted. They'll crush us, one minister shouted, his face pale with fear. We should negotiate, submit before they burn us all. Negotiate, another spat. They sent 10 ships against us already. They won't accept words, they'll only accept our blood. The council wants to erase us, a third said bitterly. Go now, and all you'll do is make the killing easier. Alden entered the chamber uninvited. His uniform was blackened with oil, his face gaunt from sleepless nights. He didn't wait for permission to speak. Gentlemen, he said coldly, the time for debate ended when the council lit their engines. They're coming, whether you bow or stand. The only choice you have left is how history remembers you. Silence fell. He swept his gaze across them. Do you want to be remembered as men who knelt while the galaxy laughed, or as men who fought until the last breath and made the council bleed for every inch they took? No one answered. They didn't have to. In orbit above Luna, Alden stood on the command deck of a new construction. The Titan's fist wasn't a ship, it was a gun. A rail gun so massive it stretched the length of a mountain, anchored to Luna's crust, powered by fusion reactors. Stripped from half a dozen colonies, its barrel gleamed under floodlights, coils humming with energy. It had never been tested. It might tear itself apart the first time it fired, but if it worked, it could punch a slug through a battleship from half a system away. Alden ran his hand across the cold steel. This was humanity now, not graceful, not elegant, brutal, unrefined, desperate and unstoppable. Will it hold? Harrow asked quietly. Standing beside him, Alden's eyes stayed fixed on the barrel. It doesn't need to hold forever, just long enough. Far beyond Sue, the Armageddon fleet advanced. Inside the council's flagship, the speaker's voice carried across ranks of soldiers. Humanity will resist. They will fight like cornered beasts, but beasts do not change fate. We are fate. The crystalline commander bowed low. His pride demanded vengeance, his eyes burned with hate, but one officer at the back, a young strategist from the Bronze Warlord's clan, hesitated. He had studied the footage. He had seen railgun slugs tearing ships apart. He whispered to himself, "They will fight in God's help us if we underestimate them again." On Earth, Alden stood once more before his men. The fleet was assembled, scarred survivors from Oris, new ships fresh from shipyards, freighters armed with bolted cannons, crews that had never seen battle but were ready to die. He spoke without flourish, his voice raw. "They're coming, you all know what that means. They'll bring numbers we can't match, firepower we can't block. They think we'll break." He paused, looking into their eyes, hard, scarred, unflinching. "But men don't break. We bend, we bleed. But we don't break, not when our families stand behind us. Not when Earth burns beneath our feet. Not when every star is watching. When the council comes, you'll show them what iron does to pride." The men roared, fists striking steel, voices echoing like thunder. For the first time, Alden allowed himself to believe, not that they would win, not yet, but that when the Armageddon fleet arrived, the galaxy would never forget what happened in. So, the stars shifted. The Armageddon fleet was close now, and the system was ready. Every asteroid, every moon, every hidden station bristled with rail guns. Every ship was loaded, every slug forged. Every man waiting. The trap was set. Only question left was whether Earth would survive its own defiance. The soul system had never been so still. Earth's blue sphere hung in silence, her oceans glimmering in the sun, her moon a pale sentinel above. Every colony, every shipyard, every station had gone quiet. Waiting, men stood at their posts in silence, helmets sealed, fingers tight on controls. Families huddled in bunkers carved deep beneath cities. Prayers whispered in the dark. On the surface, railgun platforms pointed skyward, their barrels glowing faintly in readiness. The system itself had been turned into a fortress of iron. Then the stars broke open. The Armageddon fleet arrived. 10,000 council ships tore into the system in waves of light, teleportation. Arrays burning like suns, the void filled with metal towering carriers. Sleek destroyers, monstrous battleships. They came in perfect formation, a living wall of arrogance and power. On the resolute, alarms screamed as sensors lit up with targets. The bridge fell into darkness, illuminated only by the glow of tactical displays. Fleet count confirmed. Riggs whispered, his voice trembled. 10,000 vessels. The crew stared at the screens in silence. It wasn't war, it was annihilation marching forward. Commander Alden stood tall, hands clasped behind his back. His face was hard, unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed the storm raging within. Then let's give them a welcome, he said. The first volley came not from ships but from stone. Asteroids in the Kuiper belt groaned as their hidden reactors flared to life. Dozens of railgun platforms, disguised as drifting rock, powered their coils. A heartbeat later, the void screamed as slugs the size of buildings roared forward, invisible until impact. The leading edge of the Armageddon fleet erupted. Carriers split open like eggs. Battleships vented atmosphere as entire decks vanished in molten fire. In seconds, hundreds of ships were gone, reduced to drifting wreckage. Council's formation shattered. Direct Hits across the line, Harrow shouted. Voice electric, they never saw it. Coming, the bridge shook with the roar of the crew. For the first time, hope flared. But it was only the beginning. The Council retaliated, their fleets spread. Like fire, teleportation arrays flashing. As they repositioned across the system, plasma cannons lit the void, sweeping through asteroid belts with surgical precision. One by one, the hidden platforms burned, detonating in chains of fire. Entire belts were turned into glowing clouds of shrapnel. Platforms in Sector 12 destroyed, rigs barked, losses mounting. Keep firing, Alden growled, make them bleed for every rock. The moon guns opened next. From Luna's surface, the Titan's fist roared. Its barrel glowed white-hot as it hurled a tungsten slug across hundreds of thousands of kilom. The slug tore through a battleship as though it were paper, the impact visible even from Earth's orbit. The cheer that rose from every human ship shook the void. Reload. The fist, Alden barked, but the Council had seen dozens of destroyers blinked into lunar orbit, their plasma arrays already firing. Blue-white fire carved into the moon's surface, sending plumes of rock and molten debris into space. Railgun crews died at their stations as firestorm after firestorm engulfed them. The Titan's fist fired once more before vanishing under a wave of fire. The moon shook, Earth trembled on the Resolute. Chaos reigned, enemy ships blinked in and out of range, teleporting around them like wolves circling prey. Plasma fire ripped through the fleet, tearing apart frayers armed with makeshift cannons, shattering shields, venting crews into the void. Halbert is gone, Harrow shouted. Dayan's crippled, we've lost nearly a third of the line. Keep firing, Alden roared, his voice cut through the panic like steel. Every shot counts, don't waste a slug. The Resolute's guns thundered, slugs ripped into enemy destroyers, catching them mid-teleport, tearing them apart in flashes of molten wreckage. One by one, Council ships fell, but for everyone destroyed, 5 more pressed forward. The void became hell, ships collided, burning wreckage spiraling across orbit. Men screamed over comms, their last words cut short as plasma fire tore them apart. Entire decks vented into the black, bodies tumbling silently into the void. The ironclad successor, the Hammerfall, rammed a Council cruiser head-on, her rail guns firing until the moment of impact. Both ships erupted in a fireball that lit the system brighter than the sun. Casualties are unsustainable, Rig shouted, panic breaking through his voice. We can't hold them. Alden's jaw clenched, his mind was a storm of calculations, probabilities, deaths measured against seconds bought. He knew Riggs was right. Humanity couldn't win a war of attrition, but they weren't here to outlast, they were here to break pride. Redirect all surviving platforms, Alden ordered coldly. Target their carriers. Cut out their heart from the asteroid belts, from hidden moons, from desperate ships. Rail guns focused their fire. Thousands of slugs screamed across space, converging on the massive carriers at the center of the fleet. One after another, the great ships buckled, their teleportation arrays overloaded. Their reactors imploded, their decks tore apart under the sheer force of physics. The Council's command structure faltered, orders scrambled, ships blinked erratically, colliding with one another, shields failing under the storm. The Armageddon fleet bled, but Earth bled with it. The Resolute staggered under repeated volleys, plasma. Fire ripped through her hull, melting. Corridors turning steel into rivers of molten slag, men burned alive at their posts. Starboard railgun offline, Harrow cried. Port reactor overheating. Keeper firing, Alden growled. The ship groaned like a dying beast, but still. Her guns roared. Another Council frigate exploded under their fire, debris scattering across the void. The crew cheered weakly, their throats raw with smoke and exhaustion. Hours bled into one another. The battle stretched on, relentless. By the time the smoke began to clear, the void was filled with wreckage. Thousands of Council ships floated dead, their remains blotting out the stars. Humanity's fleet was nearly gone, shattered hulks drifting. Survivors few on the Resolute's bridge. The crew stared at the screens in disbelief. They're pulling back, Riggs whispered. It was true. The remnants of the Armageddon fleet were retreating, teleporting out in scattered waves. Their formations were broken, their pride shattered. Alden stood tall, his face lit by the glow of burning ships. They'll be back, he said quietly, but when they return, the galaxy will remember today. He looked out at the wreckage, their own dead, the Council's dead. So much loss, so much fire, and yet they were still here. Railguns had spoken, and the Council had heard, but as silence returned to the system, Alden felt no victory. The Armageddon fleet had bled, but it had not died, and Earth, though, stood on the edge of ruin. The final storm was still coming, and it would decide everything. The Sol system was a graveyard. For weeks after the battle, wreckage drifted in endless silence. Shattered carriers, burnt-out destroyers, human freighters split in two, corpses frozen mid-scream. Debris glittered against the sun like the shattered bones of titans. Earth still turned beneath, but her skies were scarred. Half her orbitals were gone. Luna was cracked and bleeding from the destruction of the Titan's fist, and her colonies limped in silence. Humanity had survived the Armageddon fleet, but barely. And then the message came. Council was coming again. Not 10 ships, not 10,000. All of them, every fleet, every weapon, every ounce of pride sharpened into vengeance. They would not accept stalemate. They would not accept humiliation. They would drown Earth in fire until the name of humanity was a whisper lost in ash. It would be the final war. On the Resolute, Alden sat in silence. His ship was a scarred wreck, her armor patched with mismatched plating, her engines coughing, her reactors one overload away from death. She should have been retired, scrapped, buried with honors, but there was no time. Around him, the remains of humanity's fleet gathered, 40 ships, if you could call them that. Some were little more than freighters bolted with cannons, some were gun platforms held together with wire and prayer, but they flew, and that was enough. Harrow entered the ready room, a data pad in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. Council Armada confirmed, he said quietly. Tens of thousands of ships. They'll be here within days. Alden didn't flinch. He had expected nothing less. Any word from Earth's Council? They're divided, Harrow admitted. Half want to negotiate, half want to fight. None of them understand the Council won't accept anything but blood. Alden leaned back in his chair. His bones felt like lead, his mind a storm of exhaustion, but his eyes burned bright. Then it falls to us, he said, as it always has. Preparations consumed the system, every shipyard, every station, every colony. Bled itself dry to prepare, new railgun. Platforms were built from debris itself. Wreckage of council ships reforged into barrels and coils, orbital defenses. Ringed earth and steel, overlapping. Fields of fire ready to tear anything. From the skies, on Mars, entire canyons were turned into guns. Barrels miles long were buried beneath red stone, camouflaged until the moment they fired. On Earth, bunkers were dug deeper, children evacuated underground. Cities prepared for orbital firestorms. Every man and woman knew the truth. They might not live to see tomorrow, but their deaths would not be silent. The people whispered a new word now, not just defiance. Vengeance. The day came, sensors lit with the arrival. The void burned as the council's full armada descended, tens of thousands of ships blotting out the stars, a wall of silver and fire on the resolute. Alarm screamed, lights flickered, men braced themselves. Riggs whispered almost to himself, "It's the end." "No," Alden said, his voice calm. "It's the reckoning." He rose from the captain's chair, his uniform blackened with oil and blood. His face drawn but unbroken, he looked into the eyes of every man on the bridge. "They think they'll bury us today," he said, "but they've already lost because they fight for pride and we fight for home. Remember that when the guns fire. Remember that when they try to drown us. We are not fighting to win. We are fighting to teach the galaxy what it means to stand." The crew straightened. Fear didn't vanish, but it hardened into something sharper. Resolve. The battle began with fire. The council armada surged forward, teleportation arrays flashing as they spread across the system. Plasma storms lit the void, tearing through orbital defenses, carving holes in asteroid belts. And then the railguns answered, from Mars, from Earth, from every hidden rock and drifting husk of wreckage. Slugs screamed into the void. Thousands of tons of tungsten ripped through shields, smashing hulls, shattering carriers. The first wave of the council fleet collapsed, hundreds of ships exploding. In seconds, the void became chaos. Targets dropping everywhere. Harrow shouted, "They didn't expect us to rebuild this much. They'll adapt." Alden growled, "They always adapt. Keep firing." The council retaliated with fury. Entire squadrons blinked into Earth's orbit. Plasma cannons blazing, rail gun platforms exploded in chains of fire. Orbital stations shattered, cities below burned as debris rained from the skies. The screams of billions echoed through comms. On the Resolute, alarms wailed as plasma fire tore across her hull. The ship shook, decks collapsing, men screaming as fire roared through corridors. "Damage on all decks," Riggs shouted. "Keep the guns alive," Alden roared. Resolute groaned, but her cannons thundered. Slugs ripped into enemy ships, catching them mid-teleport, tearing them apart in sprays of molten debris. The bridge filled with smoke, sparks raining down, but no one faltered. The battle raged for hours. Humanity's traps tore into the council armada, but the sheer weight of numbers pressed forward. Rail guns fell silent. One by one, platforms destroyed, ships gutted, entire swaths of Mars burned. Her great cannons silenced under waves of fire, but for every platform lost, 10 council ships died. For every human ship torn apart, 3 enemies followed. The void was filled with wreckage, thousands of ships burning, drifting, colliding. Still the armada pushed on the Resolute. The situation was desperate. "Commander," Harrow said hoarsely, "we've lost nearly everything. Only a handful of platforms remain. Earth's orbitals are gone. We can't hold much longer." Alden's jaw clenched, his hands gripped the chair until his knuckles went white. He knew what had to be done. "Bring us forward," he ordered. The crew stared. "Sir," Riggs whispered, "we're going straight at their flagship," Alden said. His voice was calm, steady. "They won't stop until their pride is broken. We break it now or Earth dies." For a moment silence, then slowly the crew nodded. If this was the end, they would meet it with iron. The Resolute surged forward, engines screaming, guns roaring, enemy ships swarmed to intercept, plasma fire tearing into her hull, decks melted, men burned, but still she pressed on. Rail guns thundered, ripping holes through anything in her path. The Council flagship loomed ahead, a massive fortress of silver teleportation arrays blazing. The speaker himself commanded from its bridge, arrogance etched into every line of his face. "Fire everything," Alden growled. The Resolute's guns screamed, slugs hammered into the flagship's shields, collapsing them in bursts of light. More slugs followed, tearing into its hull, punching through deck after deck. Flagship staggered, shields gone, hull collapsing, but the Resolute was dying. 2. Fire consumed her decks, reactors overloaded, alarms blared, warnings of imminent destruction. Alden stood tall, unflinching. "To all ships," he said into the calm. "This is Alden. You fought with iron in your hearts. Whatever happens next, the galaxy will never forget what you did here today." He cut the channel. "Helm," he said quietly. "Wham!" The flagship. The crew didn't hesitate. The Resolute roared forward, guns firing until the last plasma fire tore into her, splitting her hull, but she didn't falter. And then she struck. The impact lit the void in a sunbright explosion. The Resolute's reactors detonated, tearing through the flagship in a chain of fire. The Council's pride, their command, their symbol, their speaker was obliterated in a single blinding instant. The void fell silent. The Council armada staggered, leaderless, broken, bleeding. Their formations collapsed, ships teleported erratically, some retreating, others firing wildly. Humanity's survivors pressed the attack with what little they had left. The armada broke, one by one. The Council ships fled the system. Earth remained burning, broken, scarred beyond recognition, but alive. Weeks later, the Council convened again. But there was no laughter now. There were no sneers, no mockery, only silence, heavy and bitter. The speaker was dead. The Armageddon fleet was gone. The Council's pride lay in ruins, and humanity had survived. Some demanded vengeance, another strike, but the will was gone. The galaxy had seen Railguns tear apart their finest fleets. The myth of invincibility had shattered. The Council's power would never be the same again. On Earth, survivors emerged from bunkers to a sky filled with wreckage. Families wept for the dead, cities buried their ashes, but amid the ruins a word spread, not defiance, not vengeance, but victory. In the ruins of the Resolute's Memorial Hall, a wall of steel bore new names, those who had fallen in Saul's defense. At the top, carved deeper than the rest, was one name: Commander Alden, the man who had broken the Council's pride, the man who proved that iron wielded by stubborn hands, could shatter empires. And though Earth was scarred, though humanity had bled, they had stood. Rail guns first, teleporters later, and pride had finally learned fear.